Hello and welcome to another version of Talk Leadership with Cedrick. You know, everybody needs a little TLC. Talk Leadership with Cedrick is where we focus on leadership and personal growth with business leaders, educators, and local thought leaders. Our goal is to introduce our audience to leaders who are making an impact with innovative ideas. You know, our guiding leadership principle is the law of contribution, which says growing yourself enables you to grow others. See, you can't give what you don't have. So first you must grow yourself in order to grow others. We believe that outstanding leaders like yourself will help us help others. So tonight we have another dynamic leader with us. And guys, let me tell you what, when I say a dynamic leader tonight, I'm really talking about a dynamic leader we have with us today. And you know, every week I like to do a proper introduction of our guest. And this gentleman is Mr. Patrick Balthrop. And so let me do this. Let me read his bio, and you're going to see he's a dynamic leader. So let's sit back and give me a few minutes here. So Pat Balthrop is the founder of Appalachia Ventures, a strategic advisory and venture investment firm. For over 10 years, Pat was the president and CEO of Luminex Corporation, a publicly traded life science tools and molecular diagnostic company. During his tenure at Luminex, they grew eightfold, folks. Now that's talking about, you know, when we say leaders, we talk about explosive growth. That's explosive growth, folks. And they received recognition as innovators, a job creator, and growth engine for their corporate responsibility and ethics. Now, prior to Luminex, Pat was running several multi-billion-dollar businesses. Now, that's billions with a B, folks. So I told you it's a dynamic leader tonight. For 2 years, he ran the business at Thermo Fisher. And for over 20 years, he ran the business at the great company Abbott Laboratories. Now, you know, I'm a little biased. So his functional experience includes general management, R&D, product management, sales and marketing, manufacturing, intellectual property, and international experiences. Since retiring from full-time work, Pat has been since retiring, he's held several different roles as an advisor to Water Street Healthcare Partners. He's the chairman of the board for 3 other companies: Discovery Life Sciences, Agendia, and Oxford Immunotech. He also serves on the board of Personalis, which is a Silicon Valley-based firm, cutting-edge genomics and analysis, and also with Pattern Biosciences as well. In addition, he serves on the Florida Board of Trustees for the Nature Conservancy, which is the world's largest conservation and environmental organization. Now, that's just awesome work, folks. Pat received his BS in biology from Princeton University, Spring Hill College, and his MBA from the Kellogg School of Management at Northwestern University. Pat and his wife, Mary Therese, have been married for over 40 years. So consistency and intentionality in his career and consistency and intentionality in his personal life, folks. Dynamic leaders do these things. They are dedicated to doing the work to ensure equal rights for all citizens and a healthy planet. They have 3 grown children. In fact, I worked with one of his grown children for a number of years, and they split their time between Pat's native Florida Panhandle and Chicago. So let's welcome Mr. Patrick Balthrop to the show.
Thank you, Cedric. That's very gracious. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Well,
and it's great to see you again, my friend.
Yes, absolutely. I'm excited to have you here tonight, and I know that our audience is going to gain a lot from you. So let's just dive into the questions that I want to ask you. And you know, I read your bio, but you know, reading your bio but hearing it directly from you on your journey to leadership is important for our audience. They like to understand a leader's background and what got them to where they are today?
So I'll give you the short version because I'm a little older than you, so there's a lot to cover there. But as you mentioned, I was born and raised in the Florida Panhandle in a Navy town called Pensacola. And so any of your viewers who are familiar with the Navy have certainly heard of Pensacola. My mom was an immigrant, and my dad was from that general part of the world. My dad, after coming back for the Second World War, used a GI Bill to go to medical school, and then he basically served as a country doctor, for lack of a better term. We didn't live in the country, so to speak, but it was back in the days when physicians delivered babies and did surgery and did the whole thing, right? So
Right.
that was my dad, and I'm one of 8 children. I have 8 brothers and sisters. I'm one of 9 children, and around our dinner table, the values that were drilled into us were the importance of education and the importance of social justice. And so the background I had as a child and the family I was raised in makes me grateful every day. And then when I left home, I went to the Ivy League. I was a football and a baseball player, so I played sports at the collegiate level. And about halfway through, I ended up transferring schools after some injuries and so on. Common story. And then I got my degree from a small school no one's ever heard of called Spring Hill College, which is in Mobile, near where I'm from. That's where I met my wife. And so that decision to transfer schools was one of the best decisions I ever made. And I got a biology degree after I graduated. My wife and I were married, and I got a job wearing a lab coat. So I was working in a clinical lab, which I think is not an uncommon background.
Right.
Which led me to being introduced to Abbott, and I had never really considered a corporate job. I had never really considered a sales job, but they offered me a sales job, and another really serendipitous but really fortuitous opportunity for me because it was just the right place for me at the right time. I joined the company because I had the opportunity to make a little bit more money and try out this sales thing, and I ended up staying there for over 20 years and had a tremendous set of opportunities. So great experiences, as you know from your own experience. That company gives you a chance to prove yourself, and if you're willing to take a few risks and relocate more than once, you can make it happen. So that decision really made the career that I have.
Well, that is awesome. I didn't realize that you were in the clinical lab because that's how I joined Abbott as well.
I'm aware of that. That's why I mentioned it.
Awesome. So you had a long executive and corporate career, and so help us understand how some of the different jobs you had helped shape your leadership style.
Well, so the somewhere along the way, I got some really valuable advice from a person who was at the time was my boss. And the one thing that he said was, always make sure when you evaluate an opportunity, in this case, within that particular company, evaluate that opportunity based on the additional experiences that you'll be able to gain. And the reason for that, he didn't articulate it this way, but this is how I articulate it, is because I never took anything for granted. And I always viewed myself as a competitive product in kind of a competitive marketplace. And I was a science guy in the business world. At that time in my career, I had very little business training. I got my MBA from the Kellogg School later. So I never took anything for granted, and I wanted to make sure I was as competitive a product, for lack of a better term, in the marketplace as possible. So I wanted to build out my experiences. So I always took jobs based on the experience I would gain rather than the title or even the compensation that came along with it. And so with that in mind, I was a salesperson. You know the track record, but I'll repeat it for everyone else. I was a salesperson. I got a field promotion. I got a chance to go to Chicago for the first time and learn kind of how the company works from the inside. I was a product manager. Again, one of those serendipitous things that happened was I happened to be in the chair when Abbott got the rights to develop the world's first blood test to detect the presence of HIV. So I was the product manager that introduced that particular test. Not because I was, and somebody said he's awesome. It was just because I was in the chair. I mean, seriously. But when the opportunity presented itself, I said, here I am. I gotta do the best I can.
Sure.
And so that kind of theme kind of ran through my entire career. So I needed management experience, so I went and got that. I moved to St. Louis and went and got management experience. I needed higher level management experience in marketing, so I moved back to Chicago to get that. I wanted to get international experience. I wanted to become a general manager. I wanted to understand distribution and foreign exchange and all that stuff. So I went home and told my wife, look, the company's talking about moving us with our 3 children to Hong Kong to run the Far East for the company. And so she said, let's do it. And so that experience of being able to live in Asia and learn not just the business side of things, but also the personal growth that came along with that, which was phenomenal.
Mm-hmm.
And my kids, who are now adults, that one of the things that they really appreciate is the opportunity to have had that experience, living in a foreign country. And so that theme, I moved back and I took over did R&D. We introduced the Axon program and all that kind of stuff. So my philosophy all the way through was I never took anything for granted, and every step I wanted to get experiences that would make me more competitive as I continued to advance my career. And so I really focused on where I had those experience gaps and tried to find a way to fill them.
Well, that is that's awesome. Taking those different jobs, and it always helps it has the ability to help your career along the way, gaining different sets of knowledge and increasing your tool belt, really. But one of the things that when I talk to new entrepreneurs, or not even entrepreneurs, actually people that are new to the workplace, they say, well, I don't know if I should take this promotion because it's a lateral promotion, or I'm not going to make any more money, right? Is kind of what they focus on. So during your career, and also I want you to speak to this from 2 levels. One, during your career, did you ever take a lateral move, and how did that help you move forward? And then the second side of this is from put on your executive hat, right? Mm-hmm. What do you tell this younger person that is considering taking a lateral move, and why it's important that they do this in their journey sometimes?
Well, I adopted this phrase that I used to use with people that would ask me that question, and I didn't make it up. It was explained to me when I was young and trying to figure out my own path. And that phrase was, you have to decide whether you want to play checkers or chess. And so sometimes, as you know, I mean, I'm not a great chess player, but I know how the game works. And sometimes you have to give up a pawn in order to capture a knight, for example, or something like that. And so it requires a deeper level of thinking, as opposed to checkers, which is kind of you move from one square to the next. And so I always adopted that philosophy. And so early in my career, before I made my first move to Chicago, I was a salesperson moving into that product manager role. And at the same time, the company was expanding the number of sales management jobs. And so at the time, they were desperate to try to find the people that had the right skills to be a sales manager. And so they did a lot of field direct promotions from salesperson to sales manager in the field. And that was a higher grade level, and they had a company car and I didn't have one, and they got a bonus and I didn't get one. in the job I was going to take. And the reason why I did that was because it was a financial hardship, but I would gain experiences and skills that I wouldn't gain if I stayed in the field as a sales manager. And because I did that, I was able to launch the world's first HIV test, which is a great thing.
Right.
Here I am talking about it, 35 years later. So that decision was really consistent with that checkers or chess idea, because I thought, boy, if I can continue to do well, then the experiences I gain by understanding how the company works from the inside, the relationships I will develop with the people that have to do pricing and the people that have to do customer service and the people in the factory and so on, those relationships will surely pay off longer term, and I'll be able to learn a lot more was the most important thing. And so I ended up becoming a sales manager, the job after that, when I moved to St. Louis. But that was a good example of me making a chess choice, not a checkers choice. And I've done that 2 or 3 times in my career. When I left Abbott after 20 plus years, I took a job with a company where the job itself was not as large in some of the traditional measures. How many people you had, or how much revenue I was responsible for. But I wanted to be a CEO of a company, and I knew that I was going to have to prove that I could be successful at a company other than Abbott before I could really compete for a CEO job. So I took that job with Fisher, and I was successful in that job. And then when I had an opportunity, I was recruited out of that job to become a CEO, and I wouldn't have gotten the CEO job if I hadn't been willing to make that interim step in the meantime. So that whole checkers or chess thing has really been a key part of my philosophy forever.
Awesome. So folks that are listening, I want you to understand what he's saying is you have to make that decision in your career if you want to play checkers or if you want to play chess. If you want to go lead, you see, you can have an opportunity to take something as of good value, or you can take something of greater value. It's not a matter of either opportunity being good or bad. It's just one that has lesser value for you long term versus one that has greater value for you long term. So I just want you to pick up on that. Pat, leaders come in all different types of packages and with all different types of strengths, right? So what strengths do you feel are important for successful leaders to possess?
Well, the first thing, and I think that's the most important thing, is a sense of humility. Everyone comes to the table with their own set of skills and experiences, and it is the unwise leader who believes that he or she has all the answers, or even worse, where they fake it. Because somehow, I have seen this, you probably have seen it too, Cedrick, where people think, look, I'm in this position of responsibility. People expect me to have all the answers. And, privately, I say to myself, I don't know the answer here, but I got to act like I do. And because there's an insecurity there, perhaps. But the single most important thing is that sense of humility, whether you're dealing with customers in a sales and marketing type of position, or whether you're dealing with customers, or whether you're dealing with scientists and engineers and R&D, et cetera. Everybody comes to the table with their own set of skills, and there's a sense of humility as the leader to be willing and able to defer to the people that have the expertise. I would argue that there's some people at very high levels of very high leadership positions in our country who could stand to listen to people who have expertise more than they do. The second thing is a sense of integrity. There is nothing that will substitute for integrity, because people can tell right away if there's a lack of integrity, and it's never ever something you can fake. But that requires, frankly, some humility and some willingness to admit you were wrong when you were wrong, and to always behave in an ethical way. The third of the 4 things I believe is honesty. Honesty with yourself, honesty with others, honesty in your communication. you and I have similar experiences. From time to time when you're dealing with a customer, as an example, something didn't go right, and you can, if you're not honest about it, that's a death sentence, for lack of a better term, in your relationship with that customer.
Right.
And so if you're dealing with an employee because they have to, there's something that they did incorrectly that has to be fixed. All those things, being frank, open, honest, is the third element. And then the last one is compassion. And when I say that, what I mean is everyone has problems in their life, issues to deal with, challenges to overcome. And there, in my opinion, there's a difference between empathy and compassion. Empathy is great, but a person who has empathy can identify with the feelings that the other person has. A person that demonstrates compassion also has an action orientation to try to resolve whatever that issue is. And so I want to emphasize, I wasn't always as humble as I needed to be. And sometimes I wasn't always as compassionate as I should have been when I was leading large groups of people. But the two things that I always maintained my integrity, and I was always honest. And those four things I think are key.
Absolutely. Well, I absolutely love that. And I'm going to put that in the comments for you. He said leader strengths should humility, integrity, honesty, and compassion. Now, those are awesome. Those are four things. Now, I don't know if you remember this or not, Pat, but when I was a new sales rep, actually. You, Tom Brown, and Sue Widener came and spoke to my sales class. And, just like most salespeople, when we're in sales training, we're there with big eyes going, oh my God, these executives are coming in to.
You should have listened to the other two. I don't know about me, Cedrick.
But here's the advice that you gave me. And I've carried it, and I have it in a PowerPoint that I've used over the years. And so this had to be 1999 or 2000. And here's what you said. There's 5 things that you said you should always have in your career to have a successful career with Abbott. You said 1, work hard. 2, have humility. So here comes that humility again, right? You said 3, show dedication. 4, have a good attitude. Meaning you said, look, nobody owes you anything. You have to act as though you're unemployed every day, right? And that's just amazing. And then the 5th thing you said was be willing to take advice.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that 4th one about act like you're unemployed every day is maybe not the most eloquent way of saying the fact that you got to bring it every day. I mean, it's if you look at the people that have been successful in whatever walk of life it is, I think one of the things that they have in common is they don't take anything for granted. They realize that what has happened in the past may have informed the current situation, but what you're doing today is what really matters. And so yeah, it's funny that you kept those points.
Yeah.
I would add one though, and
Okay.
this is based on my experience. So if I had to do it again, I would include all of those. But the other thing I would add would be dedicate yourself to being a lifelong learner. And the reason why that's important, I'll just use my own career as an example. The last job I had when I was CEO at Luminex, one of the key parts of our business involved expertise in DNA, RNA, molecular diagnostics, and all that. Well, when I first was still wearing a lab coat and then entered the industry, which was in the 1981. Everyone knew about Watson and Crick and knew about the double helix, and they knew that DNA and RNA existed, but this was a long way away from
Sure.
the mapping of the human genome and so on. And so the only way I was able to be successful in that job as CEO is if I was also willing to dedicate myself to be a lifelong learner and learn all that. in order to be competent. Because if I tried to rely on all the things that I knew, and just stopped doing it in, say, 1990, I never would have been competent or qualified to do that job. So I would add, you got to dedicate yourself to being a lifelong learner to the list.
Awesome. Well, I just added it to the list, and I will update my slide later and on the screen. Mark Smith, you might remember Mark
Sure.
Smith, right? And
Yes.
Sarah Gresham are listening in, and they said hello.
Hello.
In fact, Gresh, let's see here.
Gresh, how about those Steelers, man?
Hey, I'm a diehard Steelers fan myself. He said that avid career of multiple opportunities to gain multiple experiences. There's nothing like it.
Yeah, well, that's for sure. You got to show up though. When the opportunities are terrific, but when you get them, you got to take advantage of them, and that's really the magic secret, I think.
Absolutely, and that's what I took from your have the good attitude comment was, if you're not excited and you're not committed on day one of the job, then the rest of it is just going to be horrible.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah, that's for sure.
So I took it as show up every day, like every day is day one.
Yeah.
So, good leaders ask great questions. What are some of the best questions that maybe you've asked to motivate or inspire people, or someone has asked you and you went, wow, that's a deep question. That was a good one.
Well, so I would say, I'll give you a few. One of the things I learned from a guy that I worked for 3 different times, I think, who recently retired himself. And he was, one of the smartest business people I've ever been around. And I learned a lot from this particular gentleman. And what the number one thing that he used to ask is this up to our standards? And it sounds like a pretty straightforward question, Cedrick,
Mm-hmm.
but you can't answer it unless you know what the standards are.
Right.
And the first time I worked for him, he was in charge of marketing, and I was at the marketing manager level, and I was working for him. And so he kind of set the tone, for lack of a better term, about what those standards were. But he just asking the question required me to develop an understanding about, first of all, what my own standards were, and then what his and the company's standards were, and making sure that we were maximizing the whatever we were delivering, that they were up to those standards. And that particular company, in my view, has very high standards. And so it was another way of saying, look, you got to do the best you can. And and what you just brought me, guess what, is not the best you can. So the way he articulated that was, is this up to our standards? And then another boss I had was when I lived in Asia. He was my boss. He lived in Tokyo. I lived in Hong Kong, and the question he used to always ask is this the right thing to do? And again, it's a very simple, but also a very loaded question.
Right.
Because if you ask that question about, you're negotiating a deal, for example, are the terms right? But that's not the only question. That's not the only definition of right.
Right.
And in particular parts of the world, whether it's the company policy or whether it's the law, you have to be careful about how you do business and who you do business with.
Mm-hmm.
And so asking that question about, is this what you just brought to me, do you think this is the right thing to do, requires a lot of introspection and evaluation, and again, identifying what is meant by the right thing. And and that took some time for me to really appreciate the gravity of that. So those are not really, particularly on the surface, they don't sound like particularly insightful questions. But these two gentlemen, they both happen to be men. These two gentlemen, when they would ask those questions, that they were very deep and loaded questions. And then the questions that I used to ask people, I'll give you a couple. And one of the things I used to say to people is when you're in a position where you're dealing with people outside the company, you're representing the company to the outside world. When you're traveling and going different places, no matter what country you're in, there would always be situations where people would wonder, is doing a particular thing the right thing to do? Coming back to my second question.
Right.
But it's sometimes, in the moment, it's really hard to determine what the right thing to do is. So the question I would add to that would be, so if whatever this thing is you're considering doing, you have to ask yourself that if your spouse, your mom, and your kids were here, would you do that?
Mm-hmm.
And if the answer to that is yes, then at least on that element, it's the right thing to do. But a lot of times people, I think, get confused about what the right thing to do is. And I used to try to provide questions like that to give them a tool to use in the moment, because sometimes the mistakes people make are not because they're bad people. They just, in the moment, they just make a bad call. So I used to try to give them those type of tools to use to sort that out. And then the last one is a question that I used to ask a lot, which is, I understand your opinion, but will you please show me the data? Because at the end of the day, especially in many businesses, but especially in our businesses, the businesses I was in, data was extremely important in a number of different ways, and everyone has an opinion, which they can articulate, shape, or manipulate, but the data don't lie, as they say. So I used to say, look, I appreciate your opinion, but if you don't mind, show me the data. Sometimes I wouldn't put it exactly that, as diplomatically as that, but it's you get the point.
Exactly. Yeah. I understand you're a good sales guy, but show me what you closed.
Exactly. Or you're talking to a scientist and they're waving their hands around talking about an R&D project. And you're going, okay, great. Show me the data. Please.
Exactly. Yes. Absolutely. So I always have a segment in the show, Pat. It's called "Would You Rather." All right.
Okay.
So,
all right.
Indulge me a little bit. So, would you rather meet your great grandparents or meet your great grandchildren?
I would probably rather meet my great grandchildren. I never knew my great grandparents, but I know more about them just through family lore and so on. But my great grandchildren would be, that would be more interesting to me, I think.
Awesome. So would you rather have a life rewind button or a life pause button?
I would say neither one. Cedrick, I have, like everyone else, I've made some bad choices and made some mistakes and so on.
Mm-hmm.
But I haven't made many in the things that matter. And so, and I'm very content and doing well. And to be honest with you, I stopped working full time about 5 years ago. So I hit the pause button. As you mentioned, I still have a lot going on, but I have been able to downshift a little bit and not have the car at redlining on the RPM meter, right? So
sure, absolutely. So two more. Would you rather be stuck in an elevator or stuck on a ski lift?
I'd rather be stuck in an elevator because I have a really, really bad fear of heights. So it would take a a whip and a chair to get me on the ski lift to start with. So I don't want to be on the ski lift. That's for sure.
Okay. All right. Now the last one is very challenging. All right. So it's, would you rather have $1 million in Amazon gift cards or $100,000 in real money?
I would rather have $100,000 in real money.
In real money? All right. See, I like the million in Amazon money because you buy everything on Amazon anyway. So it's almost like real money.
I just feel like I could do more with the 100,000 in cash than that. I wouldn't have as many options as I would with the gift cards.
Right.
I don't know if you're looking for an analysis or an explanation for my choice, but that's it.
No, it's totally your choice. Well, thank you very much for that segment. Gresh says, "Oh, that's a great question on pause or rewind." He likes that pause or rewind. So he's going to be on the show here in a couple of weeks. So I might have to throw that question.
Oh man!
Out.
I better step up my game if we got Daryl Gresham joining.
So diversity, equity, and inclusion should be important to every organization. Sure. But why do you think some companies just miss the boat in this area?
I would say companies and people, miss the boat because I think there's a built-in trap. And when I say that, what I mean is you've heard it yourself. I know I've heard it a number of times, which is I want to make sure I have the best person for the job. So I believe in diversity and inclusion, but the single most important thing is that we get the best person for the job. In my opinion, this may be harsh, that is intellectually lazy, and it's indirectly anyway, dishonest. And the reason for that is because the best person for the job is often defined based on standards that are historical in nature. And if you accept the fact that diversity and inclusion is something that for which there is a gap that we have to close, then by definition, if you're always going to set the criteria as, quote, the best person for the job, unquote, then the best part of that is going to be based on criteria that are going to exclude people because historically they've been excluded. Right. And so, and I would be lying if I said that over time that best person for the job phrase, I'd be lying if I said it never came out of my mouth. Sure. But I think as time has gone on and I've become wiser and smarter about these things, I've recognized that's a trap. And so that doesn't mean, by the way, that you want to hire someone who's not qualified for the job or not good for the job. I don't mean to imply that. What I mean to say is that it's important as in a leadership position to recognize that intellectual inconsistency and then go about tackling the root cause of the problem. And so, in my opinion, I think historically, business leaders of all type, but business leaders in particular, have failed to do the work that they need to do to realize the value that diversity brings. And diversity and inclusion covers a wide gamut of factors. There's obviously the ethnicity issue, but diversity of thought, diversity of background, geographic diversity, and so on. And to be honest with you, it's one of the lessons I learned as a relatively young leader in my 30s when the company moved me to Asia, because the best person for the job, and I worked very closely with a lot of really, really talented Americans. But if I had put those people in charge of being the general manager for ADD Thailand, with their lack of language skills, lack of cultural awareness, lack of the understanding of the local healthcare system, and so on, they would have failed miserably. It wouldn't have made them a bad person. Right. It just would have been unfair for the company to put them in that job. And so if I can flip it on its head for a while, if you take a well-educated, high-performing, American and you put them in a job where they're not going to be able to have the necessary skills to succeed, it doesn't make them a bad person.
Mm-hmm.
The analogy I used to always use was the Michael Jordan analogy. You know, I'm a Bulls fan. Everybody just watched The Last Dance, which everybody loved. But you know that one episode where they talked about him trying to go play baseball didn't make him a bad athlete. It just meant he couldn't hit a curveball. You know, so he went back and did what he was really good at. And if you stick with that thought for a minute, I think the key is coming back to the diversity and inclusion question. It's important that if you really want to make progress in diversity and inclusion, it's important to take some risks and then put the tools in the bag of the person that you want to make that you want to succeed, and make sure that the job that you're doing and all the resources that you're bringing to bear are going to make that person succeed. And if so, I think that we can make some progress. The problem is that I think a lot of people say they want to do it with the best of intentions. What they don't want to do is the hard work.
Right.
And it's not easy to do, but it's important to do. So that's why I think people miss the boat.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with you. And what happens when you hear diversity, equity, and inclusion, people immediately go to the race, and it's really not just about race. It's a much broader, race is just one of the components of it, but there's a lot to go into diversity and inclusion, right? Because you could have people of all the same race in a particular job, but they don't feel inclusive because they're not being brought to the table to have a conversation. They're just being told, hey, go do this, right? So it doesn't cover that component. So what advice would you give to emerging leaders? These are, maybe junior leaders coming up, to be mindful when it comes to diversity and inclusion.
Well, I would say the first thing, if you're serious about being a leader, especially a long-term leader, in my view, the single most important thing is to set an example. Because you can talk about it all day, but if you don't do anything, then the words will be hollow. So the single most important thing is to set an example. In order to set example, I think it's important to take some risks. And when I say take some risks, what I mean is to give people opportunities, and then and because maybe they're not the best person for the job based on all the various criteria, but if you're serious about that as to making progress on this particular dimension, you take a good person, highly qualified, perfectly capable, and then you bring the tools to bear to make them successful in the long term. And so that I think is also important. And the last one is, I think it's important just to make sure that you understand that this is a job that requires you to do the work every day. One of the analogies I used to use with people was, there are some jobs that have an end. There is a sale that and you're going to close it or you're not. There's a product you're going to develop and you're going to launch it or you're not. There are other jobs that are more like painting the Golden Gate Bridge. As you may know, the Golden Gate Bridge is constantly being painted. Right. They paint one side and then they paint the other side, and then when they finish the second side, they start painting the first side again, because there are certain jobs, and in our industry, things like quality control and quality assurance fit in that category of being functions for which there is not an end. It's a constant thing. And I would say moving the organization forward on these dimensions of diversity and inclusion is like that. It's something that you can never really stop doing. You just have to adopt the philosophy, and then in order to make the organization bigger, better, and more capable, you have to be willing to do that work.
Right. Yeah, you're absolutely right. That it has to be ongoing. And, I think a lot of organizations also are afraid of having that conversation, because sometimes it's not the easy, pretty conversation. And you may say something that triggers someone in terms of their thought process. Right. But you have to be willing to bring everybody to the table and say, hey, guys, hey, look, in these four walls, we're going to have this conversation. It may not, it may get a little tense sometimes just because of emotions, but we have to always remember that we're trying to help the organization grow and get better and have diversity of thought, like you said, right? So in that, we have to be able to tackle these things, just like with a sales promotion, and the sales leader is in the room, and they're going around the room and asking all the reps, and you have this rep that's doing great, and this rep that's, they're right at the goal, but then you have these other reps that are they're not pulling everything. You're going to have some tense conversation, right?
Yeah. Yes.
To help everybody. So it's the exact same thing. And when I do this training, it's called Another Seat at the Table, right? And we do this training, we try to help organizations understand that it's okay when you set the stage the right way for people to have the conversation and the dialogue, and then we can move the organization forward.
Well, I'll just add an example that may be helpful, and that is when I was the CEO at Luminex, we were in Austin, Texas,
Mm-hmm.
and as we were growing in molecular diagnostics, one of the things we had to do was attract scientists to the company in order to develop the assays and so on. Well, Austin is a great place to live, and it's a fast-growing city and so on, and it's really rich in engineering talent from the University of Texas and other schools in Texas, and just because of the business culture that there is with the big tech companies and the chip companies and so on. So for us to attract engineers was relatively easy. For us to attract scientists was not so easy. And the reason for that was because they would say, look, I'm living in the Bay Area, or I'm living in San Diego, or I'm living in Boston. And if I take this job, or if I take a job, and my boss ends up being a jerk, or the company is acquired and I lose my job, or any one of a number of other things, then there's another company down the street that I can go to work for. But if I move to Austin, there's not as many, scientific jobs, and so it's a more significant risk. So what we could have said was, well, we give up. Then we're just not going to hire scientists, and we're just going to have to, we're just not going to try. That obviously wasn't an acceptable answer. Right. We had to look at how we compensated people, our relocation packages. We had to do all kinds of things in order to make sure that we could compete effectively. I put that in the same category as diversity and inclusion. Just because it's hard doesn't mean that you give up. Just because the answer isn't obvious about how to solve that problem doesn't mean you stop. It means you got to work hard. That's why I say it's intellectually lazy. I think it takes some creativity to make some progress, but if the organization's serious about it, they'll do it.
Yeah, absolutely. And we say the John Maxwell team, everything worthwhile is uphill.
Right? Yeah.
So let's move into the networking and mentoring type of area. So what role do you think networking plays in matriculating the corporate ladder?
So I would say this, Cedrick. I think based on my own experience, I'm not a natural networker. I wouldn't go after hours to the local watering hole to meet people or whatever. To be honest with you, I wanted to be with my wife and kids, so that's what I did. In that kind of schmoozing thing, I know that's not fair, but it sounds harsh. I don't mean it that way, but that just doesn't come naturally to me. But that doesn't mean that it doesn't exist and it's not valuable. I would just say to people who are like me, for whom that interaction that can sometimes seem insincere, mm-hmm. that has no value. What does have value is the relationships that you make with people, and you work with them, whether they're inside your company or customers or whatever that may be. If you adhere to those things I mentioned earlier, humility, integrity, honesty, and compassion, then you will be someone that people want to associate with, and they will value the contributions that you bring, and the relationships that you develop over time will come in incredibly handy as you continue to advance your career. So what I mean to say is I think those relationships are important, And I would put that in the category of networking, rather than, I think people can sometimes visualize networking as this superficial, let me go to the bar after work and stand around and slap people in the back and tell them jokes, right? That won't get you anywhere. What does get you someplace is to make a contribution, to be sincere, to work hard, to develop a good reputation, and then people will want to work with you, and you'll want to work with them.
Absolutely. Yeah. I like that advice. So then mentors, when you were in corporate, did you have mentors, and what role did they serve in your development?
So I would say the short answer is I kind of had mentors. This is what I mean. I had people that were my manager, my boss, and I would have detailed interaction with them, and they would give me advice, and they would give me things to work on, and they would sometimes provide these pearls of wisdom that I could take with me forever. Things like, is this up to our standards, or is this the right thing to do, etc. What I never had was a mentor that I continued to stay in touch with over an extended period. And I don't mean to minimize that. I just, in my experience was not like that. But I learned along the way, I learned from one of my bosses, this chess versus checkers idea, and making sure that you gained experiences and don't go hunting titles, hunt experiences. And I learned from another boss, make sure you know what your standards are, and make sure you always adhere to those standards. And another boss emphasized that the right thing to do. But I will say, saying all that to say this: the single most important mentor I've had in my career has been my wife, and now, especially since they're adults, my children have also been kind of like mentors to me. My wife has had this uncanny judgment about people from the first day I met her, and she was all, in the last job I had full time, as an example, there was a senior level guy, and she had never met. We were at a social event, like the annual Christmas party or something, and she met him for the first time. And then, we enjoyed the rest of the evening. We drive home, and she asked me about this particular person. And she said, watch him, just watch out. And I had to terminate the guy about 18 months later for reasons I won't disclose. But she was dead right about this particular guy. And so, and so she's been, we never really talked about, anything confidential. I didn't talk to her about, HR issues or whatever. She was just always she's always had that sense of people, her judgment in people, in spite of who she married. Her judgment with everybody else has been pretty good. No, but so she's been a terrific mentor to me, and she has her own standards, which are very high in all aspects of her life. And so that may not be the answer you expected, but it's, in my case, it's a truthful answer. And my children today, they're all terrific, and they will call each other and call their dad they'll call our bluff, as it were, to make sure that we're maintaining the right standards, and that we're ensuring that we have intellectual honesty and demonstrating the right character and so on. So my wife and kids have been my mentors.
Well, no, that's actually awesome and perfect, because mentors come in a wide variety of styles, strengths, and what they bring, right? And your wife and kids can be those mentors for you, because they help keep you grounded. And for the most part, they're not going to sugarcoat it with you, right? They're going to tell you, hey, look, no. You're saying this, but you're doing this, right?
Yeah.
And that's really what you want from a mentor.
Well, some people, the complexities of the corporate relationships, you have hierarchies, and someone reports to someone else and so on. And so the way people navigate that is very different, and they can sugarcoat things, or they can just avoid them altogether because they don't want to have a difficult conversation with someone senior to them. We don't have that problem in my household. So
I don't either. My kids seem to be able to just tell me what they want. Or what they're thinking. But I encourage that, actually. So that's actually
yeah, me too.
Mark Smith said something here. He says, amazing how great minds think alike. He says, Pat is covering a number of the core values from his book. And I don't know if you know, but he wrote a book called Core Values, a lifetime of leadership lessons learned as a Texas Aggie cadet.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah. So that just, the beautiful thing about that, Mark, is that, great leaders all see the world pretty much in the same kind of way when you talk about values, right? And some of the things we understand that great people think and do some of the same things, and this is what happened, or I should say, successful people, and that just differentiates them from the rest of the world. So thanks for putting that in that book. It's a great book if you haven't read it. Mark was on the show when he first launched the book. So if you haven't read that book, it's a great leadership book to get. So we've all had success in life, and you've had a great career and a lot of success. But tell us about one of those times where you had a failure, and you learned from it. And what did you learn from it?
Cedrick, how much time do we have? Wow. Well, I'll focus on one, and this will this might make your jaw drop, but I'm going to tell you anyway. There was when I was working at Abbott. This was in the 90s, and the company had the opportunity, along with several other companies, to license a particular technology. And I had come out of R&D, where I worked with Ed O'Gunroe and Kendall Hendrick and some of those other guys to develop the Axum program, and then start what is now the Architect program. And so we had a pretty good track record and so on. And I wasn't in that job at the time, but between my science degree and my kind of technical bent, for lack of a better term, along with those other people who actually had the scientific credentials, we were asked to evaluate this one technology, and there were, I don't know, 6 or 7 of us, I guess. And so we evaluated it, and we came back, and I was kind of the leader of the team. We came back and said to the company, we really don't think this is a good technology to license, and we had a justification for it. So the technology that I turned down was the PCR technology.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. So you might want to erase the rest of this recording now.
Okay.
And so, but I'm gonna draw the circle for you, though. The reason for that was there was a flaw in the system, and the flaw in the system was that all of us had senior jobs with thousands of people reporting to us. You know what it's like to work for that company. It's like most other companies. We were going, full speed all the time. And what I had not been able to do is do something which I mentioned a little while ago when I was talking about being a lifelong learner. And I was so intent with, my head down, blinders on, focused on the tasks in front of me, making my numbers, doing whatever I was supposed to do, that I didn't really have a full enough appreciation for how the industry was changing in a strategic way. And so there are a lot of people that will claim, fatherhood to some of the successful products that for example, if the joke I always tell is, if you look at resumes in our industry about the person who actually launched the Axum system, there's probably 10,000 of them. You know, so success has a lot of fathers, but failure is an orphan, right? So you won't find a lot of people that will tell you, yeah, I turned down PCR license. So and so the company has done fine, and so on. But the lesson I learned from that years later, as PCR became a thing, the lesson I learned from that was it was a huge mistake. Not, maybe to turn down the license, but for me personally, the mistake I made was I didn't put in the time and effort to keep myself current on the relevant topics and dedicate myself to being that lifelong learner that I mentioned. And so that's a pretty big failure, and not one that I'm particularly proud of. But in many ways, it was something I learned a ton from. And so I hope that's a big enough mistake for you.
That is a big one. That is a big one. But here's what I can say, and I asked that question from just about everybody that come on the show, because I want people to understand that, even someone that has a very successful career and all this type of stuff, we all go through those down moments. We all go through those things where maybe we didn't make the right decision. Maybe it didn't come out as we thought it was going to be, right? But it doesn't mean you quit, you fold up the tent, and you go home and say it's over. You rebound from that, and then you come out of it with greater appreciation and understanding and learning and all of that type stuff. And that's really why I asked that question. And thanks for sharing that with us. PCR, for people who are not laboratorians, PCR is, that's really the industry now. It's just big, right? But the point that I want you to walk away with is, when Pat made that decision, he was at one company. He went on to be CEO at several other companies, right? So life is not over when you make a bad decision in your life. Someone out there right now is listening, and you've made a bad decision. You've done something that maybe you weren't the happiest with. I want you to understand, and I want you to know, you can rebound from that. You can recover from that. You just need to be resilient and know, if you continue to do the right things, good things will continue to happen to you, even with that failure on your plate.
And I agree with that, Cedrick. I would just add, and you need to treat those as learning opportunities, because the old saying, nobody's perfect, really applies. And the important thing is not to shy away from it or avoid it or whatever, is to reach out and grab that, in my case, the mistake I made with PCR, and then kind of examine why I made it, and then go about taking action in order to make sure that I don't make a similar mistake down the road. And that's really the most important thing.
Absolutely. Man, I'll tell you what, Pat, this hour has just gone by, and I felt like we could have another hour conversation, but I won't I won't talk to you like that. I appreciate you tremendously for coming on the show. Talk Leadership with Cedrick. It's a weekly show, and what we bring, and in fact, this month, the month of October, we're bringing in C-level executives to come on the show and highlight success, and to highlight help people understand how to navigate their career, and to help people better understand from an executive level how you guys think, what things you do, so that someone can grab something from this. They may not grab everything that you said, but they may grab one or two things that they can use in their career to help them. And you've done that for us tonight. So thank you.
Thank you, Cedrick.
So Mark Smith said, great interview. Thanks, Mark, for hanging in the whole hour. I love that. You were the first to comment, and looks like you're going to be the last to comment tonight as well. So, folks, if you want to stay in contact with Pat is his website, ApacheVentures.com, is scrolling across the screen. If you go there, there's a contact button, and you can reach out to Pat. And Mark is dropping off because the Cowboys are about to play. That's going to turn out bad, Mark.
Yeah.
But
Mark should get on the phone and tell them they should tackle somebody.
Yeah. Absolutely. But Pat, again, thank you very much for coming on the show. Tell Elizabeth I said hello.
I'll do that. I'll do that.
Awesome. Well, thank you. And hold on one second. Let me close out the show quick. So, folks, tomorrow night on Talk Leadership with Cedrick, we will have Miss Amber Doss on the show. Oh, my God. You don't want to miss that show. Amber is the chairman of the board for the National Sales Network. I'm a member of the board of directors for National Sales Network Houston chapter, and she is our leader. So she's going to be on the show tomorrow night. You want to be in here in the room tomorrow night and listen to Miss Amber Doss. So I look forward to seeing you on the show tomorrow night. You guys go and have a great rest of your week. Remember, everybody needs a little TLC.